5 seconds, and then I'll be on. topic. Oh, thank you. Sorry, guys. Okay, is that a little better? Okay. I want to say thanks to Environmental Committee members for hosting this event. We try to do a winter event. We got a little behind on our schedule due to renovation, so it's actually a spring event. This is the first day of spring. Before we get started, I'm going to ask Brenton to open our meeting today with a prayer. Brenton?
Thank you. All right. In the name of the Father.
Spotlight so they can see you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Got to be in the spotlight, not used to this. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you for gathering us here together today. Thank you for the gift of our speaker, Tim Darst. Help us to listen to his wisdom and to let him turn our ears and our hearts toward nature as it cries out for our help and for those affected by climate change. Jesus, in your suffering on the cross, you mysteriously call us to hope. As we face this overwhelming issue of climate change, give us the strength to move past our fear and anxiety to instead embrace a disposition of love. Love for you, love for your creation, and love for our neighbor. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right, thank you, Brenton. Okay, we do have a very accomplished speaker presenting to us today, and he's going to discuss an aspect of climate change that really needs to be faced as we continue to devise remedies to the climate crisis that we are facing. We're going to have an opportunity after his presentation to ask questions directly here from the audience. And for those that are online, you can just go to the column on the right side of your screen, type in your question, and we'll ask Tim that question for everyone to hear and get his response to that. I should also note that the program is on Epiphany's YouTube channel, so that it's being recorded, and following today, you can pick it up and watch it again or watch it for the first time. So our speaker today, no stranger here, is Tim Darst. Tim is a Director Emeritus of Kentucky Interfaith Power and Light, and he is an adjunct professor in Environmental Studies Department at Bellarmine University. He teaches environmental justice and sustainable development at the University of Louisville. He has an MA in sustainability and environmental management from Harvard University. You may have heard of that. And an MAT in environmental education from the University of Louisville. He is an associate director of Earth Literacy with the Passionist Earth Center here in Louisville. Tim and his wife live in a solar-powered house, grow a lot of their own food, and Tim is a regular bike rider, bus commuter. So with that, Tim.
Thank you all, and it's good to see you all, and I'm glad we have the ability to have people at home watching too. I want to start. I'm going to try it again. Welcome everyone here. Welcome everyone at home. I want to start with Scripture, with Genesis, because this is our calling. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. So early on in the Bible, we're called to protect the earth, to care for the earth. Pope Francis refers back to Genesis, to those words, tilling and keeping. He says tilling refers to cultivating, plowing, or working, but keeping means caring, protecting, overseeing, and preserving. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says, "And God blessed them and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply. Replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion That word dominion, Pope Francis addresses that also in his encyclical Laudato Si. He says the Judeo-Christian thinking that grants man dominion over the earth has encouraged the unbridled exploitation of nature and is not the correct interpretation of the Bible. So what is? Well, Matthew Sleeth, an evangelical Christian who lives in Lexington, wrote in his book, Serve God, Save the Planet, that the word in Hebrew is radah. And that's similar to the dominion of rule of a monarch. In another place in the Bible, it simply means higher on the root of a plant. So it's a bit of a hierarchy. So if we are to have dominion over the earth, and we are the rulers, that doesn't give a ruler the right to kill or hurt its subjects, right? Matthew Sleeth says that dominion is similar to how we treat our children. We have dominion over them. We are to protect them and take care of them. We don't have the right to abuse them. We turn them over to teachers who have dominion over our children. And so it's a calling for us to care for the earth, to be good rulers of the earth, if you will, but simply not to destroy the earth or use it simply for our purposes and ignore the needs of future generations. So what have we done with this dominion? 60% of African Americans live in communities with one or more abandoned toxic waste sites. So we often think of caring for the earth as simply taking care of the trees, taking care of the plants and the animals. But it's also about taking care of our fellow human beings who share this environment, this earth with us. 71% of Latinos live in counties that have violated federal air pollution standards. They're more than twice as likely as blacks or whites to live in areas with elevated levels of pollution. And here in Louisville, we are in violation of federal air standards a number of times during the summer. Anybody know why our air pollution would be worse during the summer?
Lawnmowers.
In the summer, we run our air conditioning. It triples and quadruples our electricity use, so we're burning lots more fossil fuels. We get 80% of our electricity from coal, the other 20% from natural gas. And so that creates pollution, that creates ground level ozone, and it hurts our neighbors. Approximately 68% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant, compared to 56% for whites. This is the Gallagher plant right across the river from Shawnee Park. It's owned by Duke Energy, one of the dirtiest coal-fired power plants in the nation. The good news is they are retiring it. Before it was retired, though, this is a map from the health department, and this is where the Gallagher plant is. You can see this map shows us the illness due to air pollution in those areas. And so in that gold area, that group A, 30% of the people in that area complained of a symptom or illness due to outdoor air pollution. The second worst is the red area. And those of you who know Louisville's weather, the wind typically comes from west to east, and so the two areas just downwind from the power plant are the worst in terms of outdoor air pollution. You can see in the east, where we have no coal-fired power plants, much lower rates, 14, 16% complaints of illness or symptoms of air pollution. We do have 2 other power plants. This is where the Cane Run plant was and the Mill Creek plant. Both of these are owned by LG&E. Both of these are much cleaner plants. They voluntarily complied with the Clean Air Act. The Gallagher plant, the first one, does not comply with the Clean Air Act. It was grandfathered in. We're in the 21st century in a developed nation. You would think that everyone in the city would have the same life expectancy, but that's not true. You can see neighborhoods like Chickasaw, Portland, Russell, the ones in the orange, have life expectancies in the 60s, comparable to countries like Iraq. While St. Matthews, J-Town, northeastern Jefferson County have life expectancies in the 80s, comparable to countries like Canada or Japan. There are a number of factors that come into play here: access to health care, access to healthy foods, but also environment. Your socioeconomic status, your race, is a factor, a chief factor in determining how close you are to power plants, factories, railroad yards, things like that. Here we are in the 21st century, and we're still very segregated in most of our cities. Louisville is no exception, but you can see Chicago, Washington, Houston, we still have sections of town where people of color live. The yellow are Hispanic, the blue are black families, the red indicates white families. So why? Why do we have so many communities divided by race and class? How did this come about? Well, there are a number of factors. We have to admit racism in our policy has been around for a while. I don't know if you're familiar with redlining. We had a federal program to help working class people build wealth. The number one way to build wealth in America is to own your own home. After the Industrial Revolution, after the war, the Second World War even, we had lots of families who didn't own their homes. And so to help these working class families own their own homes, we had government loan programs to help them buy a home and get out of poverty, move up in the socioeconomic status. But the federal government developed maps, and they rated neighborhoods A, B, C, and D. And those D neighborhoods were the predominantly African American neighborhoods, and they were labeled as too high of a risk to qualify for those loans. So mainly white people got those loans from the federal government and were able to get out of poverty, but many of the African Americans weren't. We had Jim Crow laws that covered many southern states and worked on the principle of separate but equal. But that separateness, that segregation, causes problems. It led to the ability to do redlining. If we had mixed neighborhoods, you couldn't draw lines and segregate people and said, these are high-risk neighborhoods and these aren't. And then when it comes to determining where a factory goes, we wouldn't have predominantly African-American neighborhoods to put the factories in, or the railroad yards, or the toxic waste sites. So segregation was used as a weapon against people of color. Poor land use planning. Not keeping factories from going in across from people's homes. Not having affordable options for people. If you're low income and you want to buy a home, What neighborhoods do you have to choose from? Not very many. Many other cities around the United States have requirements that all new developments must have a carve-out of affordable housing. Louisville doesn't have that. So most of our new developments are large houses, the ones that are more profitable for the developers. And so they tend to cater towards the wealthier people. We're also seeing that pollution in those neighborhoods, those low-income neighborhoods, causes the property values to go down. So there's, again, fewer choices. And we have to admit, still today, there's an imbalance in political clout. I know in my neighborhood, a middle-class neighborhood, we can call the police, and within minutes they come and they help us. Somebody's car is parked facing the wrong direction, and they will correct that right away. Many of the lower-income neighborhoods don't have that luxury. When they wanted to put in affordable housing out at Norton Commons, that plan was scuttled pretty much immediately. I saw a quote in the paper that said, "We don't want those people living in our neighborhood." And so it never happened. You're all familiar with the cycle of poverty. There's another cycle I'd like to talk about, and that's the cycle of environmental health disparities. When you have limited options on where you can live, you move into neighborhoods that have older homes, adverse social factors, adverse environmental impacts, more noise pollution, more light pollution, more air pollution. Those environmental impacts directly impact your health. You have higher rates of asthma, heart disease, lung disease, more absenteeism from school, which limits your educational ability, more absenteeism from work, which limits your ability to move up at that job, which means then you have less money to earn, less options in terms of housing. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, says, "There is very solid scientific consensus that we are witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system." And Pope Francis would know, in addition to being a faith leader, he has a college degree in science, so he does understand the science. The U.S. bishops said that our response to global climate change raises fundamental questions of morality and justice. So right off the bat, they're saying this is a moral issue. People living in poverty, both here in the United States and around the world, they contribute the least to climate change, but they are likely to suffer its worst consequences. So just like people of color who are more likely to live in the shadow of a power plant or a chemical factory, people in developing nations, people of color around the world are more likely to suffer the adverse consequences of climate change. But first, let's talk about climate change. What is it? So just a little bit of the basics. We all know about the sun shining down on the earth, and it provides this visible light as represented by the yellow wavy lines. That sunlight brings us life, helps us grow all of the plants that we eat or the plants that the animals eat that we then eat. But some of that heat escapes right back into outer space, and you see the red lines that are wavy. They have the longer wavelengths because infrared is at a longer wavelength than the visible light, and so it passes right through those gases in the atmosphere that we call greenhouse gases. As you know, a greenhouse is a building that's made of either glass or plastic walls that allows the visible light in, but that infrared heat is trapped, and so it keeps that greenhouse warm. And that's what our greenhouse gases do, because some of them get trapped, and that's a good thing. But what we're seeing is an increase in the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that's causing our glaciers and ice caps to melt. This is the Boulder Glacier in Glacier National Park in 1932. Here it is in 1998. In fact, of the 150 glaciers that were in Glacier National Park when it was formed, only 25 remain. My wife and I went to Glacier National Park a couple summers ago. Didn't see a single glacier. So these glaciers, these ice caps, they have snow that falls every year, year after year, and it forms layers. They compress over time. And scientists, to study these, they use these hollow drills that they stick down into the ice cap and glacier, and they pull out this long cylinder of ice. And you can see this cylinder here, you can kind of see the layers. Some are more white, some are more dark. There's a really dark one, that might be a forest fire or a volcano that year. But this allows scientists to go back in time, shave off each of those years and do some scientific experiments. Inside each of those years are microscopic air bubbles, little time capsules that give us a sample of what the atmosphere was like 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And so scientists will measure the amount of carbon dioxide, which is the principal greenhouse gas, so that we can see how much carbon we had in the atmosphere back in time. And so this is a chart. On the left, the blue is carbon dioxide, and you can see this is 2,000 years of ice core data. For hundreds of years, it stayed about 275 parts per million, and about 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it shot up dramatically. The chart on the right shows temperature. Now, how did we get temperature? Well, hydrogen and oxygen are atoms of an element that come with isotopes. An isotope has a different atomic weight. It's the same atom, but it might be a little bit heavier. So the heavier isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen make heavier water molecules. And so on really warm years, more of those will evaporate. On cooler years, fewer of those will evaporate. So you can estimate the approximate temperature in the atmosphere based on the ratio of these heavy isotopes. And you can see there's a big variety in the years. It goes up and down, but on average, it's been about the same for hundreds, thousands of years, until about 150 years ago, that has also shot up. So scientists looked at this and they wanted to know why. First of all, it confirmed a theory that we've had since the 1850s called the greenhouse effect. Maybe it's the rotation of the Earth, because the Earth is sometimes more circular, sometimes more elliptical. The axis of the Earth actually changes over the eons, and maybe that's a factor. Or the polar wobble, the axis actually wobbles a lot. And they've looked at all of these, and they determined none of those can account for this rapid warming. The only thing that can account for this is the burning of fossil fuels, the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas, giving off carbon dioxide. We've been doing it since the Industrial Revolution. But 2,000 years isn't enough data to make any scientific conclusion. So they went to the one continent on the one continent on the globe that has undisturbed snowfall for hundreds of thousands of years. What continent would that be? Antarctica. Yes. And they went to the Russian station, the Vostok station, where the ice is over a mile deep. And they got these two graphs. And you can see there's a natural fluctuation of carbon dioxide. It's been going from about 180 to 280 parts per million for hundreds of thousands of years. The lower parts of the white chart show the ice ages, the last one about 10 to 12,000 years ago. This confirms the greenhouse effect that we've been theorizing. And looking at this, it looks pretty normal. And that's because I haven't shown you all the data. Because this is where carbon dioxide is now. These cycles, a Serbian scientist, Milankovic, studied these, and he found out why the Earth goes through these cycles. And it was those last three things I mentioned: the elliptical orbit of the Earth that changes the axis of the Earth and the polar wobble. But what we're experiencing now is outside of any of those Milankovic cycles. What's even more concerning, though, is every day we're burning more fossil fuels and releasing that carbon into the atmosphere. And so this is where we predict carbon will be by 2050. I like to use the analogy of a bathtub. The bathtub is the atmosphere. The water is carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And the bathtub is full. So what do you do when the bathtub is full? Well, you turn off the faucet, right? But our faucet is on full blast. And so we know it's going to overflow. We know we're going to have problems. It's going to hurt the floor. It's going to hurt whoever's underneath the bathroom. We have to shut that faucet off quickly and then find ways to get the water out of the tub. There's a human impact to all these numbers, though. Recent estimates have linked 5 million deaths a year. This is kind of on the high end, but it's clearly somewhere between 500,000 to 5 million people dying every year because of climate change. Some of it is the excess heat. The heat waves are worse. The droughts are worse. The famines caused by the droughts are worse. Our hurricanes and typhoons are worse. They're stronger, they're lasting longer. Now, who is it impacting? You can see the chart on the right, the deaths from climate change. This is from the World Health Organization. And you can see it's not evenly distributed, is it? The developing nations, especially the African nations, are hit the worst. But even after that, Central and South America, South Asia, and look who's impacted the least. The United States, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. Compare that to the chart on the left. On the left, these are the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. Who has contributed the most to this problem? Clearly, it's us, Europe, Russia. This is what the U.S. bishops were talking about. Those who are impacted the most have contributed the least. That's why this is a social justice problem. It's also why it's hard to convince anyone in our country that this is a problem. My parish has a sister parish in Escopulas, Nicaragua, and we had some of the farmers come from Escopulas to visit our church, and they talked about the problems climate change is having, how the springs are wet and too wet, and they can't plant their crops because of all the added rain in the spring, and then in the fall, they have droughts, and so it makes it really harder for them to grow their crops. And islands are sinking. We have the ice in Antarctica, the ice in Greenland melting at very rapid rates. Huge chunks of ice falling off the Larsen ice shelf on the Antarctic Peninsula, chunks of ice the size of the state of Delaware. If you've got a glass of water and you add ice to it, it's going to cause the water level to go up, and that's what we're doing. The United Nations has urged Australia to accept 3,000 Pacific Islanders per year due to climate change because their islands are sinking. In the Northern Triangle region of Central America, that's Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, they're having record-breaking droughts year after year. It's causing their governments to become unstable. It's causing them not to have the ability to produce enough food to support their families. And so they're leaving their homeland, not because they want to, because they have to. And they're traveling north. The promise of America, the United States, the land of plenty, looking for some place to raise their family, to have enough food. In Syria, again, record-breaking droughts in the rural parts moved millions of people to Damascus and Aleppo. The infrastructure in those cities couldn't handle it, and the government started collapsing. Climate change is listed as one of the causes of the Syrian civil war. And again, many refugees from that country coming all around the world looking for places to live. I know Syrian families have come to Louisville, Honduran families have come to Louisville looking for places to live. And this is just the beginning. Pope Francis tells us the use of these highly polluting fossil fuels, especially coal, but also oil and natural gas, they need to be progressively replaced without delay. There's an urgency. So how do we respond to this? Well, I'm just going to share what my wife and I decided to do as our response. So this is just our story. Maybe it will be helpful, maybe not. The first thing we did is look at our electricity use, and we were surprised to see that we were increasing our electricity use year after year, and most of us are doing that. We're buying more electronic items, we're using them more often. We found that we were using about 770 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. The national average was 890. But we thought we could do better. The Kentucky average, 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. We're one of the worst wasters of electricity in the nation. So we did the compact fluorescent light bulbs and the LED bulbs. The LEDs are 90% more efficient. We did the Energy Star appliances. Energy Star is a government program that tests all electronic items that are sold. If it's energy efficient, it gets the Energy Star label. The biggest complaint I hear about these appliances or the light bulbs is they're more expensive, which is not really true. They're expensive to purchase, yes. There's a sticker shock on it. But they're less expensive to operate. Because they use less electricity, they are actually cheaper than the others. And we quit using a clothes dryer. I use what I call a solar-powered clothes dryer. I know it's just a clothesline, but it sounds more cool if I say that. In the winter, we use drying racks, and they add humidity to our house, which makes it feel more comfortable in the house during the winter. We started unplugging things when they're not in use, especially things like cell phone chargers, because they tend to pull electricity even when you're not charging. When you've taken your phone off and if it's still plugged in, it will still pull electricity. We started turning off lights in rooms when we're not using them. We put ceiling fans in every room of our house so that instead of turning on the air conditioning, maybe we can turn on a fan. In the winter, we have them pointing up to help bring the heat down. We added insulation to our house. We found at night we have free air conditioning. God provides free air conditioning at night in the summer. If you open the windows, 10, 11 o'clock, it can be cool, and you can put in a window fan and bring that cool air into your house. Not every night, though, right? So we got one window air conditioning unit and put it in one bedroom to cool off that bedroom on those really hot nights when at 11 o'clock you open the window and it's still 85 degrees outside. 85's too warm for us to sleep in. But having that cool air come in during the day, closing those windows when we leave, we get home from work, 6 o'clock, it's 95 degrees outside and it's somewhere in the 70s inside the house, and that helps us stay cool. It helps us reduce our electricity use. So can I have a drum roll, please? So we went from 770 to 225 kilowatt hours per month. It wasn't overnight. It took many years. You see those big spikes, that's the summer air conditioning use, and those were brought down considerably. But the faucet's still on. Electricity use. But the faucet's still on, isn't it? So we went to LG&E. We checked out what programs they have. And they have a number of them, but we found out you can buy additional clean electricity, so you can pay $5 or $10 a month, and they will take that money and invest it in renewable energy projects. It's even certified by a third party called Green E to make sure they're really doing it. And so they invested in the Mother Ann Lee hydro dam on the Kentucky River and solar and wind projects around the country. And so we've been able to offset then the last bit of that electricity. But that's just our electricity. What about transportation, which makes up about a third of our carbon emissions? Well, if you look at the ways to get around, you'll see that flying is the worst. It just takes a lot of energy to keep that big bird up into the air. So if you look at the carbon emissions per person, flying is the worst. Now, some of you are squinting at this screen saying, wait a second, that second line there says that cars are really bad. Well, remember the ratio here is carbon emissions per person. And how many people do you typically see driving in a car going down the road? That's one. So if we all carpooled, if we just had 2 in a car, we could cut that in half, 4 or 5. If you're going to go somewhere for a trip and there's 5 people, you can put 5 in a car and have it much lower than 5 in the air, because that won't change the footprint per person on that plane. Now, my wife and I told you we went to Glacier National Park. Well, the bottom one there, Coach, for $26, we took a mega bus up to Chicago. And the third from the bottom, that's the Amtrak. We caught the Amtrak out of Chicago. Amtrak's like a hotel on wheels. They have a dining car, they have sleeper cars, they have an observation car with a park ranger in it telling you what's going on. We traveled across the United States. It took a few days, but that was part of the vacation. Seeing Montana and North Dakota and Idaho and Glacier National Park and all the way through the Cascade Mountains, the longest railroad tunnel in the United States, and out onto the Pacific coast. It's a beautiful trip. We really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. And getting around town, we started riding the TARC bus more. If you don't live near a TARC route and you can ride a bike, they have bike racks on all of the TARC buses. TARC has the second largest fleet of all electric buses, too. I made it a game. I made a spreadsheet. I found out with my car I was filling up once a week, and I knew I could do better. So I started driving more slowly, making sure my tires were fully inflated. Try to anticipate traffic. If I look and traffic stopped because of a red light or whatever, I let off the gas. And I started reducing the amount of fuel I was using and increasing the number of days I could get out of a tank. But then I started riding the bus more and biking more. Instead of having a doctor all the way across town, I found a doctor close by. Instead of going across town to have dinner, find some place we can go to closer by. We live near Bardstown Road, so we have movie theaters and restaurants and lots of things we can walk to. And you can see eventually I got to here. This is 52 fill-ups a year. This is 12 fill-ups a year. It makes a big difference. Now, I know these look kind of crazy, and actually 2004 didn't fit on the chart. I went one entire year on one tank of gas, and I wouldn't recommend it. I had to call AAA every time I needed to start my car. So in 2005, I got rid of my car. My wife was about here with her little Toyota Celica. And then we found a used electric car. For $6,000, we could buy a used electric car. It's an older model, which means it doesn't have as much of a range, but we don't leave the neighborhood that much. Had a 40-mile range, and so it works really well for her. That's how I got here tonight. I borrowed my wife's little electric car. But some of you are thinking, wait, what about that electric chart you showed us? Well, so we invested $5,000 in solar panels. We couldn't put them on our roof because our roof is full, so we found a charity downtown, and we put the solar panels on that roof. You could possibly do it somewhere else if you thought about it, and you could offset that. And so that's what we did. We wanted to offset it. We figured those solar panels, we calculated out, they give us 120 miles per month for the next 50 years. After that, we'll have to do something else. And then we started vacationing closer to home. We call them staycations. We found we were going to other cities and going to restaurants and hotels and things and museums, and we thought, hey, we have a lot of things in town. And so we started going to bed and breakfasts and hotels in Louisville. When the grandkids come over, we find a hotel downtown that has a swimming pool in the winter indoors, and they just love it. So there's lots of creative ways to reduce your footprint when it comes to vacationing. Also started changing the way we're doing things. These things on the right, I don't use anymore at all. They're manufactured using fossil fuels, using trees. These things on the left are reusable, washable. You can use them over and over. Stopped using disposable, single-use items. I carry with me a mug and utensils and straws so I can use them over and over. My wife and I took our backyard and we put in vegetable gardens so we don't have to mow the backyard anymore. We took the front yard and put in perennial plants, pollinators that help create habitat for local animals and plants. We started getting our food from a farmer's market. We eat what's in season. We stock up towards the end of that season and start canning things like tomatoes and fruits. We freeze. As much as we can buy local, we can, because we found the average food item travels 1,500 miles before it gets to your table. We started composting so we don't have trucks carrying our yard waste and vegetable scraps far across town. Started growing vegetables as much as we can. This is me growing sweet potatoes, and my cat Dudley always wants to be right in the middle of whatever I'm doing. We grow grapes. raspberries, blackberries, broccoli, onions, just all kinds of things. I picked 6 items, and I went to Kroger to see where they get theirs. They get their white beans from Ohio, 170 miles away. Their sweet potatoes from Louisiana, 820 miles away. Garlic from Florida, onions from Colorado, broccoli from Mexico, and grapes from Chile. So that's 10,000 miles for just those 6 items. So as much as we can grow close to home or buy locally, looking for Kentucky Proud on the label, that will help the local economy but also cut down on our footprint. Pope Francis says there is a nobility in the duty to care for creation through little daily actions. And it's wonderful how education can bring about real changes in lifestyle. Some of this is depressing. So I'd like to end with Pope Francis' quote that says, "All is not lost. Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start." Thank you. Now,
Okay, we will take some questions. Anybody has any questions for Tim? Just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. Well, I'll start with one here, Tim.
Okay.
You know, there's certain areas in the U.S. that have been, plagued by lead in different areas. Is that a problem in Louisville and any of our disadvantaged neighborhoods?
Lead is a big problem. It's a neurotoxin. It gets into the air and it directly impacts the learning ability of children. Lead didn't used to be in our gasoline. I know some of you all are my age, and so you all remember when we had leaded gasoline. You'd pull in to the station and they said, "Do you want leaded or unleaded?" That was during the year they were phasing it out. They started putting lead in gasoline because General Motors was getting lots of complaints about the engines knocking, making this sound, and so they were adding different chemicals, and they found that if you add lead to the gasoline, it stops the knocking sound. And so for many years, we're burning it, putting it into the atmosphere, breathing it in. We also had it in a lot of our paint, and so we had lead paints all over our walls, and the chips come off. And even our canned goods were lined with lead. Once they banned that, once they phased it out and so got it out of our food system, IQs actually went up by 6 points in schools based on some studies. And so yes, I'm afraid that low-income communities are plagued by this more than others. The Louisville Health Department, Metro Louisville Health, has some studies, and they show higher levels of lead in the bloods of children in the West End, and that directly impacts that cycle I was telling you about too. You don't do as well in school, you have a less chance of getting a good paying job, and limits your ability to buy homes in nice neighborhoods. So yes. Good question.
Okay, I don't see any online questions yet. Here's one over here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for including your own history. That's a real inspiration. But my question, I hope it doesn't seem trivial, goes back to that graph you showed of the 500,000 year history of CO2 and temperature. You attributed those cycles to astronomical variation, but which is the chicken and which is the egg? What would have caused the CO2 fluctuation matching the temperature cycles if it was astronomical?
That's a good question, George. Thank you. If you look at the globe, you'll notice that there's more land mass north of the equator than south of the equator. And so that land mass in the north of the equator will grow more plants, those plants in the summer were pulling more of that carbon dioxide. As the changes of the earth, though, cause more of these plants to start capturing this carbon dioxide. The more plants we have growing, the more land that has plants growing will cause this. And so these are all cycles with the plants, actually. And so for long periods, lots of plants, warmer planet, pulling in that carbon dioxide. Then changing that will change the amount of sunlight those plants get. The plants start dying. As they decay, they give off carbon dioxide, and we start moving into the cooler periods. But you see how much carbon dioxide it takes to throw you into or out of an ice age? It's only about 100 parts per million will throw the entire planet into an ice age. And look how much more we've got now. Many more than that. So, in fact, if you look at these cycles, it looks like we were about to go into a cooling period, and scientists were predicting that. We were about to start moving downward into a cooling period, but we never got there because of this additional carbon dioxide. Now, that carbon dioxide that we're putting into the air, it really originally came from plants because those fossil fuels are from decayed plant and animals that lived on the planet millions of years ago. As the plants died and they fall to the bottom of the ocean or fall to the bottom of lakes, sediment covers them, or shifting of the tectonic plates would take organic matter and bury it. Those plants took that carbon out of the atmosphere, and now it got buried. They actually changed the atmosphere. Millions and millions of years ago, we had no animals on the planet. We only had plants. And as those plants died and got buried, they were changing the atmosphere, taking carbon out and giving off oxygen, and that allowed for animals to evolve on the planet and changed it to a cooler planet so that we could have animal life in abundance. And we can still go within these small cycles and we're fine. But we're going back millions of years because we're taking that ancient carbon that was buried beneath the earth, we're burning it and putting it into the atmosphere. I probably did more than answer your question, sorry.
You mentioned solar panels and that investing personally you did in a situation. And could you go into that in a little more detail?
Sure.
So that we
Sure.
could know how that's accomplished and how to set that up?
When my wife and I put solar panels on our house, the payback was really long, approximately 50 years payback. And the installers told us they last about 50 years. So it wasn't a very good financial investment back then. But it's come down considerably now. The solar panels still, they say their useful life is about 50 years. They degrade about 1% per year. So after 50 years, they're only at 50% production, time to replace them. But the payoff now, the savings from that electricity is more like 13 to 15 years. And so you'll make your money back, you'll double it in 30, by 45, you've tripled your money. So it makes a lot of sense financially now to go to solar. Like the light bulbs and the Energy Star appliances, though, people look at the cost, the sticker shock. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't have that much money to buy solar panels. They don't think about all the savings they're going to make. So it makes financial sense to do it. Not everyone's house is conducive to solar, though. Many people have big trees. I'm not suggesting you cut down the trees to put up solar panels. Enjoy those trees. They help shade your house and keep it cooler. And so there are people probably in this parish who can't have solar panels at their house. Or there's probably people who already have solar panels and maybe want to get an electric car. And so they might want to invest in solar panels. So this worship center could easily house quite a few solar panels and help bring down the operating cost of the parish. And that was what I was hinting at. There are 23 houses of worship or faith communities in Kentucky that already have solar on their houses of worship. So.
Hey, so I know one of the things that we hear companies talk a lot about is carbon offsetting, right? And I know Pope Francis and Laudato Si seems a little skeptical of the virtue of that. So I didn't know if you could speak a little bit about carbon offsetting and maybe the pros and cons.
Sure. Carbon offsetting can come in many different ways. That's what my wife and I did when we bought solar panels to put on a nonprofit downtown to offset the solar that the electricity that our car was going to be using. Those solar panels in our car are all plugged into the same grid, so we're putting clean energy on as we're pulling energy off. That to me is a fairly easy, simple offset, and putting them on this church could be a good way to do it. Offset the electricity you're doing it at home. You get a tax deduction because you're donating the panels, so dollar for dollar. There are some offsets that maybe not as good. You have to be careful. I believe the LG&E program is a good one, $5 or $10 a month. That's a carbon offset. But there are some companies that will go plant trees, and you think, well, that'd be great, planting trees, but you have to be careful. I've seen these companies, they're planting trees, but they're harvesting them in a few years. And so you have to really do your research and make sure that it's a reputable company or that it's certified by a third party. I really think it's important for us to get off fossil fuels, and we can do that by looking at everything, our cars, our water heaters may be using natural gas, our stoves may be using natural gas, lawn equipment, convert all that to electric, and then convert our entire electrical grid to renewable sources. And we can do that in a number of ways. You could put solar on your home, you could invest in wind farms or solar farms somewhere else. I know LG&E has a solar farm off I-65 near Simpsonville. And it's a financial benefit for them, but I know there's lots of people that want to support companies doing that. And so you can invest in those type things. So some offsets are better than others, I guess. I know some people feel it's more like buying indulgences or something. I'm going to keep using my electricity. I'm just going to buy, this from someone else. But I think there's good ways to do it.
Just wanted to add to your mentioning the economics of solar panels. There's a recent development here in Louisville called Solarize Louisville or Solar Over Louisville, which you can opt into, and it's a group buying opportunity. And the short answer is you can wind up saving 15 to 20% over what it might cost to go independently to a solar installer. And there's more information available on the Metro Louisville website.
Yes, that's a good point, George. Thanks.
Okay, Tim, this is a downer. I mean, it's hard for me to stay optimistic. because what you're saying is really countercultural. Americans live large, and just looking around our country, I don't see Americans willing to give up living large. And it's not a popular topic, as you can see from the massive turnout that we have here. Of course, we probably have thousands that will be seeing it online and so on. But how can we actually make a significant difference?
No, that's a good question, Joan. And a lot of what my wife and I chose to do was personal change, especially the young people today. My students say, we shouldn't have to make personal change. We shouldn't have to make all these sacrifices. We should be able to live the way you all lived. You all created these institutions that are unsustainable. They want the institutions to change, and they make a good point. I think personal change can lead to institutional change. LG&E did not have any of these solar programs when we first started doing this. And it wasn't until 300 customers in their service area turned to solar that they're like, okay, maybe we need to do something. So I know there is a connection between individual change and institutional change. But we also do have to change those institutions, and I'm starting to see it happen. If anybody watched the Super Bowl, you would have noticed there were a lot of electric car commercials. I don't know if you all have seen in the news, but Ford is starting to make an F-150 Lightning, an all-electric F-150 Ford pickup truck. Who would have ever thought this? Most Kentuckians will not buy a Prius. They would be laughed out of the state by their friends, but they will buy a pickup truck. And they had, 200,000 advance orders. They're going to be making the batteries just a couple counties south of here. It's going to bring thousands of jobs. They're going to even put solar panels outside the plant to build these with, at least partially, with renewable energy. I see institutions changing. I do have hope that these institutions are going to continue to change, and even these high gas prices, even though they may be short-lived because of what's going on in Ukraine, I think that's causing people to buy more. I know electric vehicles are in short supply now because the manufacturing can't keep up with the sales. Even the used electric vehicles, their costs are going up. The demand is going up. More and more people are moving. And eventually we're going to hit a tipping point, and we will have many, many more people changing over. But I see individual change has led to institutional change, and the institutional change is happening. Is it enough to stop climate change? No. Climate change is here. Is it enough to stop the worst effects of climate change? I believe it is. And the young people I talk to, they're ready to jump on board with all of this. If you talk to marketing people, they have a marketing segment of individuals called LOHAS, L-O-H-A-S, Lifestyle of Health and Sustainability. These are the people that buy organic foods and Priuses and sustainable products, and it's a growing market segment, and that segment is starting to drive the market of the types of products they produce. Good question, thank you. Do you see one? For the people at home, we want to make sure. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment about the gasoline, the anti-knock tetraethyl lead. You know, they could have used methanol or ethanol, but they could patent tetraethyl lead. So bad choice for us. But then I wanted to ask about Rubbertown. I got on a bus tour, and we went down there, and I stood outside, and my eyes started burning. Oh, it's horrible. Right. I don't know if they're doing anything about that or not, but something needs to be done.
Yeah. So the comment was about Rubber Town and the toxic fumes that you can smell when you get out. In the 1990s, University of Louisville got a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency to start monitoring the toxins there, and working with the West Jefferson County Community Task Force, they were able to get a new regulation called STAR, Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program, that reduced the amount of toxins being released in the West End. As you all may know, the Environmental Protection Agency has been getting its funding cut over the years by Congress. And so they've lost the funding to continue that monitoring. We're working with the Air Pollution Control District. They're trying to get monitors in place to start monitoring this. Knowing what we're putting into the air is the important step to more change. So they've improved it some. There's still room for improvement. But there's a big demand for plastics, for rubbers. So anything made from rubber or plastic, if we can do our part to stop using them. When someone wants to offer me something plastic, I have to think, that's made in somebody's neighborhood. And if I keep buying plastics, even if they're recyclable, that's putting toxins into somebody's neighborhood. And so trying to move away from plastics is important. Trying to get institutions to stop making things out of plastic is important. And continuing to work at the national level. President Biden has made some very powerful statements about environmental justice and reducing our toxic air pollution. We'll see if he follows through on it. It's promising. Hopefully, we can have some, not just executive orders, but we can have some actual legislation. There's an Environmental Justice Act that we're hoping to get passed through Congress. So that could make a difference.
Are there countries that you can point to that are using alternatives that could maybe give us some hope or success in that area?
Well, yeah, there are quite a few countries that are making big differences. With renewable energy, it's going to be different than it was with the fossil fuels. With the fossil fuels, you can dig up coal and move it anywhere. With renewables, it's more like harvesting. And so you can't harvest the same thing in all places. So we're not going to have so many wind farms here in the Ohio Valley. Maybe at the tops of mountains. You can see them if you take I-64 to Washington, D.C., you can see them in West Virginia. So there was a professor out of Stanford, Mark Jacobson, who did some extensive studies. He did it on all 50 states. He did it on 130 different countries. And it comes up with a different formula for each country on what the solutions are going to be. Onshore farm, offshore farm, capturing tidal energy, geothermal that's related to magma, just all kinds of different options. And each state, each country is going to have a different formula for that. But he's done the calculations, and he found that it's viable in all of these countries. It will create more jobs than it's going to lose from the fossil fuel industry. It will save us money, and it will save lives. So if you get a chance, look up Mark Jacobson at Stanford. He's got extensive studies on this, and it's very hopeful.
Don't shoot me. I'm 100% on board with doing away with fossil fuels. I don't see how solar and wind and all the renewables can produce enough for the appetite that we have. So does nuclear fit in your scheme of things?
Well, going back to Mark Jacobson, his studies show that we actually do have enough potential energy from renewables. So from solar, from wind, from hydro, we can do it. And there's a lot of creative ways to store that. You're harvesting it at times when it's plentiful and storing it for times when it's not. So I believe we can. I do know there's a big push, even a lot of environmentalists are pushing for nuclear. They're wanting to do lots of energy in a short time frame, and so nuclear may be able to provide that. There's problems with nuclear. It does require mining of uranium, so it's not technically a sustainable solution because eventually we will run out of that. We won't run out of wind or sun or water. We will run out of coal, oil, natural gas, and uranium. But in the short term, people are saying that's a viable option that we won't have the carbon emissions, the same amount of carbon emissions, so that's a possibility. Other technologies like carbon capture are a possibility. We can currently grow algae using the flue gas that will capture all of that carbon dioxide in the algae. You can turn the algae into oil, into a liquid, and store that out of the atmosphere. You could even technically turn carbon into bricks. You know, graphite is carbon, diamonds are carbon. You can make bricks out of it. It's very energy intensive right now, but there are a lot of technologies. The good news is we don't really need any new technologies. We have enough wind, hydro, solar capability for this. We would have to have a lot of farms, solar farms in Kentucky. We have a lot of farmland. You can raise sheep and cattle. You can even grow some vegetables under solar that don't like the direct sunlight. So our farmers need the income. Having solar farms that also grow food could be a real boom to our economy here. In Kentucky, we're worried because we've been an energy leader in the country. We've been a coal state, we were oil state. If we want to be a leader in producing energy, we need to get creative and pass laws in Kentucky that make it good for the farmers, provide income for them, have lots of solar capability for the farmers, and still be able to grow their crops or livestock. And I'm not at all mad for you. I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you.
Given that I do believe we need to work individually and corporately, what top 2 or 3 things for our parish corporately would you recommend, as well as top 2 or 3 for the individual, just to increase our own awareness and that we have a dog in the fight individually as well as corporately?
Well, it's important to start with the low-hanging fruit, the things that are easier and that have the bigger paybacks. Geothermal, which maybe I haven't mentioned for that. So, you know, down beneath the earth, it's nice and cool. If you've ever been to a cave, you know how cool it is, and that you can use that cool air to cool off our buildings. Bellarmine put in geothermal wells. They put in 88 wells, 500 feet deep underneath their parking lot, able to capture that cool air, pump it into the buildings, and it has a fairly good payback on it, and you're going to make your money back on that. Yes, it's a big investment of money, but you could do that at home. You could do that here at Epiphany. That's another word for that type of geothermal is called a ground source heat pump. Heat pumps are highly efficient HVAC systems. If you don't have the room for somebody to drill down underneath your home, you can get an air source heat pump. The technology works now in this part of the country. I know Union Church in Berea got air source heat pumps and were able to drastically reduce their electricity use. And they also did solar. So both of those, solar and geothermal, can make a big difference. They both have good payback numbers on them. They will pay for themselves within the life of the systems. So those would make a lot of sense. Lighting is another big one. I think Epiphany's done a lot of lighting, but if you wanted a third, LED bulbs, yeah, replace them. The can't remember the name of the utility. It was one of the electrical cooperatives in Kentucky, closed down one of their power plants. And the reason they did it, they said, was LED bulbs. So many people had reduced their electricity, they didn't need that power plant anymore. So it makes a big difference. 90% more efficient. And you think about how many bulbs we have in the city, that could make a big difference. Good question, thank you.
Okay, Tim, thank you so much. Great information, very eye-opening. Yeah.
Thank you all.
All right. Appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you again sometime here.
Well, I hope to come back. Thank you all.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Well, folks, we'll wrap up here. I hope you enjoyed it. And I did want to acknowledge we had a question that come in online here, and it was very similar, talking about the use of alternatives by other countries, and Tim addressed that. So I just want to make sure that we did get some questions there. But again, thank you all for coming today, and spread the word that this is available at Epiphany's website, the YouTube channel. Okay. Thank you very much.